Here's a wonderful project that is one of the most popular ones from my workshops when I teach. It's framing a cabochon. It can be any shape, and you can see it's just three wires, one to the front, one to the side, and one at the back. And then you can elaborate with the top with spirals and frilly bits and all sorts. So once you've learnt the basic technique, you can then go to town and just use your creative imagination. So I've got a lovely piece of jasper here. You can see this is a cabochon, which is a flat back and a slightly rounded dome top. This is from Charmers Gems, and I do recommend their website for gemstones. So what I do is I use a piece of string to just measure. You could use a piece of paper, anything, just to measure around my cabochon, and I add a good 2 inches, sometimes 3 inches, depending how frilly I want the top of my pendant to be. So that's my measure, and I use that as my measuring piece to cut 3 lengths of, this is 0.8 20 gauge. This is silver plated copper wire, but it could also be sterling silver, but it's roughly, you want a gauge of about, I don't know, 0.6, 0.8, that sort of gauge. This is 0.4 now, and I need 3 pieces of this as binding wire. So I'm just short pieces, you can see, not long. So I've got 3 of my longer length and 3 of my shorter length. So to get started, you need just to make sure that all these longer pieces that are going to frame around your stone are going to be nice and straight. So I'm just running them through my fingers. Some people use nylon pliers to pull through, whatever you're used to, whatever you like to do, but going through my fingers is fine. So you pick up all 3 straightened strands, and you want to hold it right in the center so that each of those wires are sitting one on top of the other, not all bundled up. So one on top of the other, and then start wrapping with the center of the very fine strand. I'm just flattening it just to make sure that they don't bundle together, so they're staying parallel, so one on top of the other like a flat ribbon. And then just bind, I don't know, sort of 5 or 6 times around the middle, trying to keep them together. And if they don't stay together, don't worry, you can just scooch them along and get them to come together with your pliers. And so once you've done a few binds around, make sure that the cut ends are going to be on the same side, because they'll go inside the binding on inside the stone, so they won't scratch. So just make sure it's nice and neat, they're all clumped together, and there's no ends protruding from the outside of those 3 wires. And it's worth spending a bit of time, just because you won't be able to get back and do this again. The next binding wire is going to go along from there, so you're going to have just measure about an inch or so, especially with this shape of stone as an oval. And again, do exactly the same thing. You're just binding it around and around. It'll be easier this time because you've already got the 3 held together in the middle, so they're not wobbling around everywhere. And again, make sure the cut ends are on the same side as your middle binding. So all the cut ends should end up on the same side. And make sure they're not sitting outside of those 3 binding wires. They're really neatly down on the inside. Again, make sure it's nice and neat and flattened. And then your 3rd binding, exactly, well, or roughly on the opposite side. You won't have to be too accurate at this time with your measurements, because these little bindings will be able to move up and down, so you can reposition them. So again, make sure your binding wires are coming to the same side as everything else when you cut them off. So and then just make sure everything's nicely flattened, everything's all neat. So there's your 3 bindings with the center and the 3 to the side. So the next thing is to start just with your fingers, or you can use a mandrel, just start bending, because you've got that curve. This is going to be the base of your pendant. So depending on the shape of the stone that you're setting or framing, just start bending it so that it sort of starts taking that base shape. And once the base is in tow, get a piece of masking tape and place it on the binding, the very middle binding, and just stick that to the base of your stone. So make sure that the base binding is at the center base of your stone, and then you can just stick the tape over that, and then you know it's held together, because it will be impossible to hold everything. And then start pushing the other wires, the other 3 wires, and you can move these side bindings. So you want them to be roughly halfway on the side of the stone. So just, you can do this all by eye, it doesn't have to be measured. And then put a piece of, once the binding is halfway up the stone, put a piece of binding tape over it, and then do exactly the same for the other side. This way your wires now are held securely around the stone, and that gives you the chance to concentrate on doing the top, securing the top together. Now what I tend to do is just sort of bend the wires over the top of the stone, just to get a shape, so I know that's the shape I want to come to eventually. And then I separate them, and I get one from one side and then interlock it with one from the opposite side, and so forth. And that way you just get a neater top. You don't have to do this, it just doesn't get so bulky if you sort of separate them, if they come together like that. It just means that you don't have a mass of wires trying to wrap around each other. So once you've got those held together, you want to find one of the center wires and bend that up straight at a right angle to the rest of the stone. So that is the wire that you're going to wrap around to hold all the other, the other bits of the frame together. So just keep that one sitting upright from the center of the stone. And now just take any one of the wires, it doesn't matter which, and wrap them around this central protruding wire. So it doesn't matter, one is going to go in one direction from one side, and you can wrap them, a couple of times around. But basically you want to secure it around this middle stem and bring them all to the front. Although I think, as I've got quite a few, I'm going to have bring one wire to the back and the rest to the front. So that's a decision you can make, because I quite like to have a little detail at the back. If the pendant spins around, there's also something to look at. So I've got 3 at the front and 1 sitting at the back. The next thing is you're going to just make sure it's completely tight and secure. I'm just going to wind that around a little bit more so I feel that the wires are not going to come off the stone when I start removing the binding tape. So make sure it's nice and secure, it feels like it's there, and then we can add detail to these wires. So I'm going to make little spirals with the excess wire here, which these little spirals will hide that wrap at the top and will add this very decorative detail to the outer frame. But you may have seen all sorts of beautiful framed cabochons where you bring a wire across the stone, or you make a detail that sits on the stone, or you twist the wires. There's all sorts of things you can do. I'm just going to show you the most basic project now that gives you a start. And actually, you'll probably have learnt from my tutorials that for me, simplicity is always the best. I do go for very simple, and I like teaching simple because I think, especially when you've got a beautiful stone like this lovely jasper, you don't need to overdo the wire work. You really, you know, the focal part of your pendant is the gemstone. So it doesn't have to be over fussy. I know the spirals are quite fussy, but to me that's enough. That's enough detail, just because I love spirals. Maybe because I'm slightly round the bend. So there we are. We've got spiraling everything up to the top. Don't worry what it looks like at this point, but you want to start separating the last wire to bring it to the back. The first wire goes one side to the back, one wire remains in the middle around the outside of the stone, and the other wire will go to the front. So just sort of, if you get your fingers just in between those little bits of tape, just to pull it so you know it's not going to bounce out as soon as you remove the tape. This means it's sort of already, you can see the center wire is holding the frame and the rest is just going to grip it. So now remove all the tape. This is the fun bit now. So you can take off the tape. That's helped you hold all those wires in place without having to hold it, you know, having a third or fourth hand. And the great thing about this masking tape, it doesn't leave any residue whatsoever. So now you can start pulling those front and back wires out. So using your fingers as much as possible, because you don't want to scratch the stone, and just pull those wires in and they'll come in from where the bindings are. And so each side from the base and each side from the top, you can sort of pull them down. And don't worry about what's happening to the top if that's all moving around. We'll come back to that right at the end. So there, now the frame is holding that stone. That wire frame is holding that stone, and I'm working from the back just to make sure that's nice and tight and the wires are sort of work hardened by pushing them like this. Obviously, if you've got a beautiful gemstone, be very careful not to scratch it with the metal of your pliers. So you can always use some of that masking tape, put it over, or use a wooden dowel or something like that. But a bit of masking tape over the metal of your pliers so that you're not going to scratch a beautiful gemstone and make marks on it. And just push those wires until they feel really, tight, they can't be pushed anymore, and they've been work hardened. And then you can come back and look at the top again and just rearrange everything as you want it. So you can fiddle around with how you want those little spirals to look, if you want to reposition them, in a different format, and make them look as decorative as possible to hide the binding underneath. So spend a bit of time moving those wires around and just, arrange it as you wish, to look. So I'm just moving things around, making it look a bit more aesthetic and making sure that my projecting wire at the top is nice and central and everything is firm and held together. So the next bit is the bail. I'm going to add a little, I've got a lovely carved wooden bead here that I feel will set it off. So I like to put a bead just above there. And now I'm going to make the bail. It's a very, very simple bail. So I'm going to hammer and spread the wire that is projecting, but only near that bead. I don't want to do the whole of it, just a little portion that's just above that bead. And you'll see it's spreading out into flat wire rather than round wire. So it's giving it a little bit more, sort of width there. And I'm going to make the bail out of that. So I'm going to bring I've got some bail making pliers here, but you can use anything. You can use your round nose pliers. Bring it round to make a loop with that flattened wire. And it's nicely spread so it looks a bit better than just round wrapped loop or a link that you could make. I should have mentioned that you can obviously weave a bail, and by weaving a bail you would have left two projecting wires instead of spiraling, all the others. You would have left two, and then you could have woven a top bail, which is another way of doing it. But for this very simple, smaller jasper stone, I think one hammered wire bail will be, just enough to set the stone off. So just finish off that edge, make sure there's nothing sticking out. It's always important not to have any protruding wires at any point of your wire work. So, and there's a bail that we can put a chain, a ribbon, a cord, or whatever we want to suspend it from. And I think we're going to put it from, I've got a piece, this is some suede leather that will match in very well with the jasper. So a sort of light natural suede. It's a flat piece, so it's like a ribbon, but I can make a fastener on that. So I'm using my round nose pliers, first of all, just to make a circle. And that circle has to be able to feed, you've got to be able to feed that cord through that circle. Once you've established the right size, keep curling the wire around on the same spot. I mean, that's exactly like making your jump rings. It's just making an even shaped coil, and you want to make that sort of just a sort of centimetre long. You don't want it too long, and leave a tail. So again, do exactly another one for the other side of the cord, because you'll need two of these. So the same thing, now you know where to wrap around, what diameter you want to wrap around to make this coil, and you just do the same thing, another coil, and again leave a little tail and cut it off from the spool. So those little, there'll be a fasteners on the cord in a minute. The other thing you want to make is the actual fish hook. I'm going to make a double fish hook because of the weight of the stone. So I'm doubling the end of the wire, and I'm just trying to squeeze that end together so that it runs a bit more parallel. And then I'll try and straighten it out a bit. So I've got sort of a doubled section of wire, which is just under an inch long. But again, it's up to you how big you want to make the clasp. And then I'm going to wrap that excess piece around where the doubled end finishes, so that and cut it off the spool, leaving, well, that's up to you, but make enough to make a link. So I'm just going to finish off that end now. I don't want any spiky ends, so I'm just going to cut it off here and squidge and squish the end so that there's nothing spiky. So now you've got this doubled wire, and we're going to make a hook. This is going to be the fastener. We're going to make a hook out of that doubled wire, which will be nice and strong. It's a doubled fish hook, really. So create the curve. So using your round nose pliers or any rounded mandrel, create a hoop or a curve in the doubled wire and sort of push it in from the back a bit, so you've got a nice sort of curvy shape, and then just make a tiny little lip at the very, very end of the wire, which is, the hook shape, and that gives you the doubled fish hook, or shepherd's crook, I don't know, fastener. Now these little coils need links on the end, so they're made at right angles to the coil. If you have too much wire, yeah, I've got too much wire, so I'm just going to undo that a bit, take a bit off. You can always trim, come back. It's always better to have too much so you can take off, and better than having too little where you can't add on. So there's your link at the end. Do the same thing with the other one. So you've got two links on each of your coils, and just give them a little bit of a hammer because you want them to be work hardened. Just hammer the very, very end. Do not touch the coil. If you hammer the coil, you'll squish it down and completely destroy the shape. So just put it to the side of your block and hammer the end of that link, and that's nice and firm now and solid. And so you're going to feed the end of the cord, because it's flat. I'm just going to bend the end of that cord around just to create a bit more bulk. If it was a round cord, no problem, I just push it in. So push that cord in right to the top of the coil, and then to create it, to make sure it's going to not come out, is you're going to find that very, very last circle on that coil, and you only squeeze that last circle and tighten it around the cord. So only that last circle, tighten it and then push it in to the coil so that it goes down into, and that is gripping now the cord. You can always add a tiny bit of glue if you feel you're not sure it's safe enough, or if it was a bit loose or something. But if you've done it correctly, it will hold. So again, the other side is the same. I've doubled the end of the cord because it's flat. I've pushed it right through, and then I'm going to only find that last, very, very last circle and push it tightly around the cord. Make sure it's really gripping hard, and then I push it into the coil so you can't see it. It's sort of like disappearing into the very, very end of that coil a bit, and that makes it nice and neat. And again, that's nice and firm. If you want to add a bit of glue just for peace of mind, by all means do. If you feel it with wear and tear over the years, it might come apart. And now you just want to link this onto one side. So I'm just creating a loop which will then go onto the end of that coil link, and then I'm going to wrap it closed. So it's just a wrap link really, and that means it's nice and secure. It shouldn't come off. It's not a jump ring that can be pulled open, because you've always got to think the stone that that's on the front of your pendant might be a little bit weighty, so it's got to, the other side of the necklace has got to hold well. And there's your fastener on the cord, which is just works very well for the other side. It means you can do this on ribbons, you can do it on cotton cord, anything. It'll work on anything. And there's your pendant. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and please do subscribe for more. Many thanks.